Welcome to Book Buzz Reviews and Summaries. Imagine this. A massive hurricane barrels toward a densely populated coastline, threatening to displace millions. Elsewhere, a medical breakthrough offers the potential to save thousands of lives, but at the cost of skyrocketing inequality for millions more. Meanwhile, a looming climate crisis forces us to confront questions about how much we're willing to sacrifice today to protect the generations of tomorrow. These aren't distant, theoretical dilemmas. They're the stark realities shaping the world we live in right now. And they all ask the same piercing question: what do we do when every choice feels impossibly tough? Welcome to Catastrophe Ethics: How to Choose Well in a World of Tough Choices by Travis Rieder, a profound, thought-provoking exploration of how to navigate moral decision-making in a world riddled with high-stakes dilemmas. Rieder takes us beyond the simplistic right versus wrong mindset and delves into the murky terrain of ethical nuance, where the lines blur, the stakes are immense, and the consequences of our decisions reverberate far beyond ourselves. In this groundbreaking book, Rieder confronts the ethical questions that keep us awake at night, the ones that defy easy answers. What happens when doing what seems right for one group inevitably causes harm to another? How do we balance short-term survival with long-term justice? And most importantly, how do we make decisions that align with our deepest values when the pressure is on, the risks are enormous, and the outcomes are uncertain? Drawing from philosophy, real-world events, and his own experiences as a bioethicist, Rieder offers a compelling framework to help us think critically, choose wisely, and act courageously in the face of life's toughest challenges. He doesn't shy away from the hard truths. Instead, he invites us to grapple with them head-on, challenging our assumptions and expanding our perspectives in ways that are both humbling and empowering. But what makes this book truly special is its relevance to everyone, because catastrophic choices aren't just the domain of policymakers or global leaders. We all face our own mini catastrophes in life: the moral dilemmas, the impossible decisions, the moments where every option feels flawed yet urgent. Whether it's about family, community, or global crises, Rieder's insights are a lifeline for anyone seeking clarity in a chaotic world. So, are you ready to step into the heart of life's most pressing questions? To explore the boundaries of ethics in a world where no choice is perfect, but some choices are better? Then join us on this journey through Catastrophe Ethics, a book that promises to challenge your mind, awaken your conscience, and help you discover what it truly means to choose well when the stakes couldn't be higher. Let's dive in, because in a world like ours, understanding how to make tough decisions isn't just important, it's essential. Part 1: Summary of Catastrophe Ethics: How to Choose Well in a World of Tough Choices by Travis Rieder. Chapter 1: The Ethics of the Unthinkable. Travis Rieder begins with an arresting premise. What happens when our moral frameworks are forced to confront situations of extreme crisis? From climate catastrophes to pandemics and technological upheavals, Rieder paints a sobering picture of a world teetering on the edge of massive, life-altering changes. He argues that traditional ethical theories often falter when applied to catastrophic scenarios, where choices can involve life and death trade-offs, competing obligations, and unforeseen consequences. Rieder invites readers to imagine themselves in morally complex situations. Would you hoard resources to protect your family at the expense of your community? Would you risk your life for a stranger when disaster strikes? These questions, he asserts, force us to rethink our assumptions about right and wrong. The chapter sets the stage for the rest of the book by emphasizing that catastrophe ethics isn't about hypothetical thought experiments. It's about preparing for real, urgent dilemmas. Rieder's gripping examples and philosophical inquiries pull readers into a conversation they cannot ignore. Chapter 2: The Moral Landscape in Crisis. Rieder explores how crises disrupt the stability of our moral compass. Drawing from historical examples such as wartime famines, natural disasters, and societal collapses, He examines how people's ethical choices often diverge during catastrophic times. He introduces key philosophical theories, such as utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics, and critiques their limitations in high-stakes contexts. For instance, he questions whether utilitarianism's greatest good for the greatest number holds up when resources are scarce, or whether deontology's rigid rules can adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Rieder suggests that traditional moral systems need to evolve to address the messy, ambiguous realities of catastrophe. The chapter weaves in gripping anecdotes of human behavior in crises, from acts of selflessness to moments of betrayal. Rieder challenges readers to reflect: what kind of person would you be when everything is on the line? Chapter 3: The Psychology of Catastrophe. This chapter delves into the psychological forces that shape decision-making during emergencies. Rieder explores concepts like survival bias, moral stress, and cognitive dissonance, explaining how our brains struggle to process ethical dilemmas under extreme pressure. He uses real-world case studies, such as the decisions made by rescue workers during Hurricane Katrina or families fleeing war zones, to highlight the tension between instinctive self-preservation and moral responsibility. Rieder also introduces the concept of moral injury, a psychological wound that occurs when someone is forced to act against their deeply held values. For example, he discusses healthcare workers during the COVID-19 pandemic who had to decide which patients to prioritize when ventilators were scarce. These decisions, he notes, leave lasting scars on the human psyche. The chapter underscores the importance of preparing for ethical dilemmas before they arise, as snap decisions in moments of crisis often lead to regret or moral compromise. Chapter 4: The Role of Values in Crisis. Rieder argues that our values become both our guideposts and our battlegrounds during catastrophic times. This chapter examines how personal, cultural, and societal values clash in moments of crisis. For example, should individual freedom take precedence over collective safety during a pandemic? Should the rich bear a greater burden in climate mitigation efforts, or is fairness about everyone contributing equally? Rieder challenges readers to clarify their core values and consider how these might influence their decisions under duress. He provides exercises to help readers identify what matters most to them: family, justice, community, autonomy, and explores how these priorities might conflict in scenarios of limited resources or imminent danger. The chapter ends on a provocative note, asking, if you had to sacrifice one value to uphold another, which would it be? Chapter 5: Compassion versus Survival. This chapter examines one of the most difficult moral tensions in catastrophic scenarios: the balance between compassion and survival. Rieder recounts harrowing stories, such as sailors stranded at sea or families during wartime rationing, where the line between helping others and protecting oneself becomes painfully thin. He discusses the ethics of triage, a system designed to prioritize those most likely to survive, and explores its emotional toll on those who must implement it. Rieder also delves into philosophical debates about altruism, questioning whether acts of self-sacrifice are truly ethical if they jeopardize one's own survival or the well-being of loved ones. The chapter's central message is that compassion and survival are not mutually exclusive, but finding the balance requires courage, wisdom, and moral clarity. Rieder encourages readers to consider how they would act in scenarios where the stakes are impossibly high. Chapter 6: Leadership in Crisis. Ethical decision-making at scale. Shifting from individual ethics to collective action, this chapter examines the role of leaders in navigating moral dilemmas during catastrophes. Rieder profiles historical and contemporary figures who made tough choices in the face of adversity, such as Winston Churchill during World War II or Jacinda Ardern's leadership during the Christchurch shootings. He explores the qualities of ethical leadership, including transparency, empathy, and the ability to make unpopular decisions for the greater good. Rieder also critiques leaders who exploit crises for personal or political gain, underscoring the devastating consequences of unethical leadership in catastrophic times. The chapter offers practical advice for those in leadership roles, emphasizing the importance of clear communication, collaborative decision-making, and staying grounded in one's values. Chapter 7. Building a Framework for Catastrophe Ethics. In the final chapter of Part 1, Rieder begins to synthesize the book's key ideas into a practical framework for ethical decision-making during crises. He introduces a step-by-step approach, which includes 1. Pause and assess. Take a moment to evaluate the situation and gather as much information as possible. 2. Clarify values. Identify which values are at stake and how they conflict or align. 3. Consider consequences. Weigh the short and long-term outcomes of each possible action. 4. Engage others. Seek input from those affected to ensure diverse perspectives are considered. 5. Act with intention. Make a decision and commit to it, knowing it reflects your best ethical judgment. Rieder acknowledges that no framework can eliminate the pain of tough choices, but he argues that a structured approach can provide clarity and reduce regret. He sets the stage for Part 2, where he promises to explore specific case studies and provide deeper insights into applying catastrophe ethics in real-world scenarios.
Part 2.
In Part 2, Travis Rieder shifts from laying the groundwork of catastrophe ethics to practical, real-world applications. Through a mix of case studies, detailed scenarios, and actionable insights, this section equips readers to face ethical challenges with clarity and confidence. Chapter 8. Case Study, Climate Change, and Collective Responsibility. Rieder opens Part 2 with one of the most pressing global crises, climate change. He dives into the ethical dilemmas surrounding individual and collective action, highlighting how systemic inertia often conflicts with personal responsibility. He explores tough questions. Is it morally acceptable for individuals in wealthier nations to continue high-consumption lifestyles when they contribute disproportionately to global emissions? How should governments prioritize climate justice, balancing the needs of vulnerable populations with economic growth? Through vivid storytelling, Rieder examines real-world examples of climate activism, such as protests, divestment campaigns, and legal battles. He illustrates the ethical tensions between personal sacrifice and systemic change, challenging readers to consider how their own choices ripple through society. Chapter 9. The Ethics of Scarcity, Resource Allocation in Crises. This chapter tackles the difficult decisions that arise when resources are limited. Rieder explores scenarios like pandemic triage, disaster relief, and global food shortages, drawing from historical examples such as the rationing systems during World War II and the allocation of ventilators during COVID-19. He delves into the ethics of fairness versus efficiency, asking whether resources should be distributed equally or prioritized for those most likely to benefit. Rieder introduces frameworks like the lifeboat ethics analogy, where difficult choices must be made about who gets a seat when there aren't enough for everyone. The chapter offers practical tools for navigating such dilemmas, including strategies for evaluating trade-offs and engaging stakeholders in transparent decision-making processes. Chapter 10. Personal Sacrifice versus Collective Good. Rieder zooms in on the moral tension between self-interest and the collective good. He recounts stories of individuals who made extraordinary sacrifices during crises, such as frontline healthcare workers during pandemics or civilians who shelter refugees during wars. But Rieder doesn't romanticize these actions. Instead, he examines the psychological and ethical costs of self-sacrifice, questioning whether it's always the right choice. He challenges the idea that martyrdom is inherently virtuous, arguing that sustainable moral action often requires balancing personal well-being with one's contribution to the greater good. The chapter closes with a provocative question: are we morally obligated to act heroically, or is it enough to do what we can within our limits? Chapter 11. The Role of Institutions in Ethical Decision-Making. Rieder emphasizes that ethical decision-making isn't just an individual responsibility, it's deeply influenced by institutions. He explores how governments, corporations, and organizations shape the moral landscape during catastrophes. Using examples like disaster relief efforts, public health campaigns, and corporate responses to crises, Rieder highlights the power of institutional policies to either uphold or undermine ethical principles. He critiques failures of leadership, such as inequitable vaccine distribution during COVID-19, and celebrates successes, like coordinated international aid during natural disasters. Rieder urges readers to hold institutions accountable, emphasizing the importance of advocacy, transparency, and systemic reform in creating a more ethical world. Chapter 12: Technology, Catastrophe, and Ethical Ambiguity. In this chapter, Rieder examines the double-edged nature of technology in catastrophic scenarios. From AI-driven disaster prediction tools to the moral dilemmas of autonomous weapons, he explores how technological advancements create both opportunities and ethical challenges. He raises thought-provoking questions about responsibility. Who is accountable when an algorithm makes a life-altering decision? How should we navigate the trade-offs between privacy and public safety in surveillance technologies used during crises? Rieder's analysis is both cautionary and optimistic, urging readers to approach technological solutions with a critical but hopeful mindset. Chapter 13: Learning from the Past, Ethical Lessons from History. Rieder takes a step back to explore historical case studies of ethical decision-making in times of crisis. From the Underground Railroad during American slavery to the Kindertransport during World War II, he examines moments when individuals and groups faced impossible choices with courage and ingenuity. These stories serve as both inspiration and cautionary tales, highlighting the importance of ethical reflection and preparedness. Rieder argues that understanding the successes and failures of the past can guide us in making better choices when faced with future catastrophes. Chapter 14: A Practical Framework for Catastrophe Ethics. Building on the foundation laid in Part 1, Rieder revisits his decision-making framework and expands it into a more robust, actionable guide. He outlines 6 key steps for ethical decision-making in crisis situations. 1. Define the crisis. Clearly identify the nature and scope of the catastrophe. 2. Identify stakeholders. Consider who will be affected by your decisions. 3. Weigh competing values. Determine which ethical principles are in conflict and prioritize them. 4. Assess consequences. Think through the short and long-term impacts of potential actions. 5. Engage in dialogue. Involve others in the decision-making process to ensure diverse perspectives. 6. Act with accountability. Make your choice transparently and be prepared to take responsibility for its outcomes. Rieder provides detailed examples and exercises to help readers internalize this framework, ensuring they feel equipped to navigate ethical dilemmas in real time. Chapter 15: Hope and Resilience in the Face of Catastrophe. Rieder concludes the book with a message of hope. While the challenges of catastrophe ethics are daunting, he reminds readers that humanity has a remarkable capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and compassion. He highlights stories of communities coming together in the wake of disasters, from rebuilding efforts after earthquakes to global solidarity movements addressing climate change. Rieder emphasizes that ethical decision-making is not about achieving perfection but about striving to do better, even in the face of uncertainty. The chapter ends with a call to action, urging readers to embrace catastrophe ethics as a lifelong practice. By preparing for tough choices and committing to their values, individuals and societies can navigate crises with integrity and humanity. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get new video updates.